What's up? This is for the Wrestling RHAPUp podcast. I hope I'm saying that right. But specifically for Mari, who I hear is a great fan of mine, so clearly she has good taste in wrestlers. Actually, I'm at work right now, getting ready to get badassery put on my face, but I wanted to say Happy Pride Month. And thanks to you guys and to Victoria, Billy, and Grace, and everybody for just doing you. And I think that one overall message for all months of the year is always do you. And so thank you guys for doing that, for being a good example of that. And thank you also for your support of me. So, I got to get to work now, but hopefully you guys will see me later.
Throw 'em up, lay it down just like Matt and Mari. Wrestling liver half up's gonna make it sorry. Feeling like The Rock cause I'm driving in Ferraris. And we coming every week and it's feeling like a party. Moolah Ric Flair, showing out like Bianca Belair, Best podcast, flush it in the air, Roman Reigns and we win it, don't care, No cap. Throw 'em up, lay it down just like Matt and Mari. Wrestling liver half up's gonna make it sorry. Feeling like The Rock cause I'm driving in Ferraris. And we coming every week and it's feeling like a party.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Wrestling RHAPUp podcast. I'm your host, Mari Forth, and with me, as always, my co-host, my tag team partner, Mr. Matt Scott. Matt, how are you?
Ooh, I'm good. I was gonna say Happy Pride, but I think that's how I started our last episode anyway. This should be coming out the second Saturday of Pride Month, but I'm good and very excited for today's conversation, which is I think a much needed one in pro wrestling spaces. And so, Mari, we should probably talk about what we're doing today, right?
That's what I was gonna say. Can you can you tell our listeners what we're doing today?
So I mean, look, if there's one thing that Mari and I do from time to time on the Wrestling RHAPUp, it's just like going into issues that we really care about when it comes to pro wrestling. And we were talking this weekend is DC Pride, so why record during DC Pride, first of all, when we could have this very special edition of things come out, focused on, LGBTQ plus representation in pro wrestling. And again, not a conversation that happens nearly as much as it should happen. And so, obviously it's Pride Month. And one thing I want to acknowledge just before we really dive in and get started is that obviously, to touch on like the heavy things first, we're definitely in a time where like anti-trans legislation, anti-LGBTQ plus legislation is at an all-time high. And while we're going to talk about pro wrestling and representation, I hope that this is a reminder for people that, like, one, queer voices matter. Two, that we deserve rights and to be heard, and that wrestling fans should care about LGBTQ plus issues, because we're people and we're here and it matters. So that's why. Mari, why are we doing this?
Yes, exactly. So we have assembled a amazing panel today of people to talk about what it means to be like an LGBTQ plus fan of wrestling, to watch it through that lens, to talk about how queer stories are told in wrestling spaces. What are we missing? Are there things that got done right or were done wrong, stuff like that. And mostly just to make sure that we know that we're giving voices and platforms to people and to topics that, like Matt said, aren't necessarily at the forefront of pro wrestling in general. So we'll also in our show notes and show descriptions, we'll have some funds that you can donate to, like the Trevor Project, the human rights funds, in order to support queer, LGBTQ like rights. Like, we really want to make sure that we are helping fight these anti-trans legislations and all these legislations that are really like trying to strip rights from people that we know and love, and just people in general. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so I'm so glad we're doing this, and I think we have just an amazing group of people. So let's quit stalling. Let's get some of the boring stuff out of the way. If you haven't already, please go subscribe to the Rhap Has a Podcast.
What's it
page.
called?
I know. You can go to RHAPHasAwebsite.com/reality TV RHAPups. That's right. Nope. RHAPHasAwebsite.com/RHAPups feed. Yeah, I'm here. We're good.
I mean, then there's also like RHAPHasAwebsite.com/wrestling feed to subscribe to us specifically.
That's what I was gonna say next.
Okay, Mari, you've got this. I believe in you. I'm just
Thank
here to support you.
You interrupted me. It's okay. It's whatever.
It's Pride Month.
But you know what? You can do that. Yeah. Tell you shut up. If you haven't already, go subscribe to our feed, RHAPHasAwebsite.com/wrestling feed. Make sure you subscribe to the reality TV RHAPups feed by going to RHAPHasAwebsite.com/RHAPups feed. That's RHAPUPS feed. Just make sure you subscribe. That really helps us here. You can also rate and review on any of the platforms that we're on. Spotify, Apple. That also helps getting us out there, getting the word out there, getting our voices heard. That really helps. And if you send us reviews, we might read the reviews on the podcast. Okay, enough housekeeping. Get that out of the way.
Enough of the business.
Yeah, it's over.
And let's introduce our guests. First and foremost, making her way to the podcast, a staple of the wrestling wrap-up. Some know her as the sophisticated, sensational, spectacular, Stella, excuse you, a great wrestling name, by the way, I'd say. But she's more widely known by her shoot name and roles, including podcasting about movies and TV on Rhap Has a Podcast and on Post Show Recap. And as one of my co-hosts on the Pride Has Spoken Survivor podcast, please welcome Grace Leeder.
Gay, wrestling's so gay. Wrestling's so gay.
Only should be gayer. Grace, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. Back on the Wrestling RHAPup, but chatting about Pride.
Hey, that's what we're here for. And you know what? Another guest who is back on the Wrestling RHAPup, making her way to the podcast, serving foxy realness. She is the Divas Drag Race Season 3 winner, the Orlando Drag Race Live Season 7 Miss Congeniality, and has been your reigning, defending Divas champ for 5 years and counting. Catch her all over Orlando each week, showing the girlies how drag is done. Please welcome the one and only Victoria Mother Effin' Cage.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me again. Like, it's an honor for sure.
It's an honor to have you here. Of course. And we know you're fresh off of meeting the Queen.
Yes, Queen Foxy herself. Oh my gosh. And she was the best to meet. Absolutely. So wonderful.
Well, icon.
Yes, legend. All that good stuff.
Yes, and speaking of icons and legends, we would not be a complete panel here today without our final panelist making his way to the podcast. You can see him this Pride Month at Pro Wrestling After Dark, Invictus Pro Wrestling Magic, Barroom Entertainment Wrestling. He is the Purple Rainmaker, the business, and your friendly neighborhood babyface douchebag wrestling with the vision to change the world. He is Billy. Excuse me, let me show some respect. The Billy Dixon.
Hello, hi. Very nice to be here. What a lovely introduction. Lillian Garcia is shook. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And it's just exciting to have all of you here to have this conversation. And maybe Billy, I'll start out with you just in asking the very first question that we tend to ask people, like, what is your history with pro wrestling?
Oh, pro wrestling is like my favorite, most long lasting abusive relationship. Um, um, and I started off like most people. Okay, I'm gonna like take you on a tangent and take over the show for a second.
That's
Like
fine.
I compare wrestling to like being like a fundamental like Christian or like religious person. Like I was indoctrinated as a child, and now I'm spreading the word as an adult to the people. So I started off with my grandparents. Then I continued as a teenager when everyone else thought it was like not cool. And then I was dumb enough to want to do it and give myself long-term brain damage. So yeah, it's fun. And I love this art form more than anything. I think it's the coolest thing ever. And it's so cool that it's super acknowledged that it's gay. It's always been gay, but super cool that it's, it belongs to the gays now. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and we'll get into that definitely. And just for those who haven't like heard from Victoria, and we'll get to you, Grace, too. Like, what, Victoria, could you remind the folks of what your history with pro wrestling has been? And if there are like gay elements that intertwine with that, feel free to bring them in.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been a lifelong WWE fan. Like my father was really into it and he got me into it like very young. So I would say like 6, 7. And it's something that I like never really gave up. So I like followed it since then, and the divas have raised me basically. So yeah, that's the connection that I have with wrestling, and of course I still keep up with it. And yeah, even did it for like a month, like pro wrestling training, like back in college, and it's
Oh my
fun. But it's all
gosh.
drag, it's all stage performance, art. Like, so there are so many things that I do like currently in a day-to-day, week-to-week basis that like speak to WWE and wrestling and all that overall.
Yeah. By the way, I have to ask because you have gone viral for your Alicia Fox
Yes.
lip sync, among others. There's a Lita lip sync. There are probably several others. Have you done any more pro wrestling lip syncs since you were
Yes,
last on the
actually.
podcast in January?
Yes, I have. So just a couple of weeks ago, I did another Alicia Fox number. And it was actually for a competition down at my local bar, Mannequins Lounge, where I perform every Thursday. It was our very first competition like we've had there. And we're just feeling the water, seeing. And of course, I won because, reigning defending Divas champion over here. But yeah. So actually, if you'd like, I don't think I have it on my Instagram yet, but since you mentioned it, I will share it and you can have access to it.
There we go. And speaking of sharing, Grace, you've
Yeah.
been on this podcast for like the last 2 years, multiple times. Like, how the hell did you get into wrestling? What did we even talk about this?
I don't know if we've talked about it. I just I have 2 older brothers, so I feel like I must have just been on television. Wrestling was probably on, and I just watched it, and I just fell in love with it. I think it's like it's so camp and silly and ridiculous and the best. And yeah, I feel like one of my I really remember the Billy and Chuck storyline being like, oh, this is like, so interesting, and then it was terrible and awful. But yeah, the first part of that storyline was like very great. It was very cool. But yeah, with their manager Rico, yeah, boy, problematic, but also like when you can only find so much representation, so yeah, I just love wrestling. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up though, because before of course we get to talk about the present, we have to acknowledge kind of where things have been. You brought up Billy and Chuck and Rico, of course, who had like multiple iterations of implied gayness, actually for all of them. Like I look at Billy Gunn, who was, I don't know if Mr. Ass was supposed to be gay or what was
homoerotic for sure.
Definitely homoerotic.
Yeah.
But I was just gonna ask, like, from your perspective, and you referenced Billy and Chuck, like, what was it like being an LGBTQ plus like wrestling fan growing up? And you know, the negatives, the positives, all of it. Like, let's get in and talk about it.
I mean, what's really interesting is like I didn't, you know, I wasn't out as a kid, so but there's a lot of similarities to like the way that wrestling was perceived in terms, like I feel like it was sort of a thing that as I got older was like more and more I felt like I had to hide that I watched it, because the Attitude Era was certainly like popular, and we can talk about like Goldust as another like example of like a wrestling character that we can talk about that like is just completely based on like homophobic tropes, but is like a fascinating bad guy villain. But as I got older, my friends like stopped watching wrestling. By the time like Billy and Chuck come around, like my friends were not watching wrestling, and I was like the person who was like, no, I still think I like it, and I still want to keep watching it, but maybe I actually have to hide that I like it from my friends. And then I think by the time I like came out, certainly it was still not like there wasn't at least I was only really familiar with like WWE at the time. Like I had no knowledge of independent wrestling. I think the cool thing about like once I've like now I live in Toronto, like there's so much independent wrestling and wrestling. There's lots of like queer wrestling, and it's so online that now there's like so much LGBTQ wrestling you can find out there, which makes sense because the whole thing is like camp and a spectacle, and you know it makes sense that wrestling is gay. Yeah.
I mean, Victoria, does it make sense to you that wrestling's gay? I see you nodding, so I'm like wondering, and yeah, and I was just curious about like your like the same thing about like what it was like being a not straight wrestling fan.
Yes, wrestling is absolutely queer in every way, shape, and form. To be completely honest, it's like it's drag. You know, you create a character, you put on your face paint or your makeup, and you like perform, you entertain, right? And growing up, because like I mentioned, I've always been a wrestling fan, and so I started watching like around like the Billy, Chuck, Rico, like that era, and that was new just in general because I don't know, like I was young, couldn't really like register that in my brain, but I'm thankful for it because like those were the characters that I was drawn to and I didn't even realize it. So like, of course it was the divas for me 100%, but then it was like, okay, with the male superstars, it's like Rico, Goldust, like the more flamboyant type characters that I felt like I related to, even though I couldn't put like a specific word on it or like, you know, connect the dots because I was so young back then, but I appreciate it now.
Yeah, I think it's like funny too because the like one thing that you could count on, or you could definitely in the past count on WW to do, you could still count on them to do, is like to not acknowledge like the sexual orientation of the wrestler, if as long as it's not like a straight wrestler. But I think that was always fascinating. Like for Rico of all people really jumped out to me. It was something about like his like the second generation era of Rico who had like the glitter on his face and like other things.
He was like a full-on baby face, like a good
was.
guy. He had Miss Jackie as his assistant, and like it was like the whole shtick was actually like he was a good guy, which is pretty wild. But I mean, wrestling is always like literally since like the first golden age of wrestling is Gorgeous George. His whole thing is that he's the bad guy. He's flamboyant, and you know, and people want to see him get beat up essentially. And so the business was like based off essentially like homophobic like people like wanting to go see Gorgeous George get beat up, but he's like one of the greatest entertainers ever and was like one of the first like big wrestling names, and it's all based on this like flamboyant queer character.
Yeah, it was a lot. It's a lot. And I guess Billy, like as someone who actually gets in the ring and does the graps, I'm curious if there was like anyone who inspired you or any like not straight wrestlers that inspired you to feel like you could do it, because it's like things have changed a lot even in our time as fans, right?
Yeah, I would say in childhood I really didn't feel gravitated towards the Billy and Chucks and Ricos. I think, I mean, I never actually like ever came out. I think I was always out. No, I know I was always out, which is pretty lucky, but there was something in the back of my mind that was like, they're pulling the stunt. Like I could see it for what it was, I guess, as a kid. But I think the women were like really the most intriguing things to me growing up. In particular, China, because I didn't know what she was. I just knew she was a badass, and I was so young. I thought that she was also Xena, Warrior Princess. Like I thought it was the same person.
Right.
And I was drawn as a kid to performers that were equally as feminine as they were masculine. So like my favorite wrestlers when I was a kid were like Jeff Hardy and China. Because like to me, Jeff Hardy for the longest time, I think fans didn't know what his sexuality was because he was a man with 65 different hair colors every single week and nail polish and pantyhose. And I was just like to me, he's like the prince of wrestling, like just like so effortlessly cool. And it really stuck out to me as someone who personally I feel like I am as feminine as I am masculine. So those two in particular really like stood out to me as like kind of the people to first like hook me and to like really I connected with them before anyone else. And shout out to the Divas, like the original Divas Six Pack Challenge Survivor Series 2001. Like God bless.
Yeah, I feel like that's also like an interesting thing that you mentioned though. Like a lot, I mean, all of us are definitely women's wrestling fans too. And I feel like it's like, I mean, I am definitely a women's wrestling fan now, but like growing up, I was so like, I just gravitated so much to that. Like I talk about, and I think like someone else who kind of fits a little, like a lot into your criteria, Billy, is like Lita. And I still love Lita as a character, just like from bringing that, that energy of being able to get in the ring with the, you know, with the men and just mix it up. And I don't know. I haven't like put the pieces together about like what it is about like the divas or the women's wrestlers especially that's so interesting, but I think it's like just like it's not your typical like gender roles. Even when it was women wrestling each other like with the Six Pack Challenge, like we didn't have women wrestling each other for so long, right? But I don't know, I'm curious like other thoughts too.
I think that the way that like women are treated in terms of the way that like either not put on wrestling shows or confined to a specific space is like the way that I think often sometimes we feel as like queer people, right? Is that like we're they were othered and ostracized to a degree, and it took a long time for like them to be able to show that they like could put on a show just as good as the men, because our society is stupid and patriarchal. So I think that like there's probably a reason why like queer people will resonate towards the women's wrestling, not just because it's like I think like there also is a way in which like some of that's like there is in which they're having fun with it in a way that like sometimes the men's stuff isn't. So I just think that
Yeah, and also when there's a lack of representation, you have to find your representation in other ways. You know what I'm saying? So with the lack of open queer representation back in the day, you just are drawn to what moves you, as much. And I think some of the stuff back in the day, even for me, you probably wasn't registering as either, queer coded or stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think for me as a wrestling fan who's been watching since I was 10 and stuff like that, I just thought I enjoyed what I enjoyed. And then when we did get overt queerness, it felt like a lot of the times it was the butt of the joke. A lot of some of the things that I remembered was like the hot lesbian action, right?
Oh yeah.
HLA. Yes, the HLA. I was like, what is happening? What is on my screen right now? And and the funniest thing about that is I remember like when they got beat up and I was like, okay, this is what I like, because why are we doing this? You know what I'm saying? Like it just felt weird. It felt like it didn't feel like, even as a kid, I could tell that wasn't for queer representation. That was like supposed to be for like male gaze. You know what I'm saying? Like HLA was for the male gaze.
The male gaze or the male gaze?
Thank you.
That's right.
Which gaze are which gaze?
You know what I'm saying? Like it felt weird. It didn't feel like a representation. It felt like a mocking and a mockery.
Yeah, these writers, they don't represent us in the slightest, and they're so out of touch. And I assume they were out of touch back then when they were making fun of everything. And that's just their view of how they see, queer people. And you could hear it on commentary where even like the slightest like flamboyant character would be described as, oh, peculiar or unique or bizarre or whatever, and use these words to not really describe them as gay or queer, you know what I mean? But have that essence, and then of course, you know, whatever fallout happens after that is
Do you
whatever.
remember the story with, or the storyline where Mark Henry, I think it's like when he was, it's some point when he's sexual chocolate.
Sexual
And I
chocolate
can't
era.
remember if it's Mae Young stuff or China
Yeah.
stuff or whatever, but he goes on, there was
Oh,
a
yeah.
video I had as a kid that was like wrestling's most shocking moments, and it was Mark Henry like hooks up with a man. Does anybody remember? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
vaguely.
but like I remember watching in the same way that, like, you know, in the late 90s I'm watching like Maury episodes with like trans women, and like they're like clearly like making fun of trans women, but I'm like, this is the only trans people I can watch, I can only see it. So like, you know, it's awful that that's like the way it was, and then it completely being like the butt of the joke. It's completely like the Ace Ventura punchline of like, oh, like how disgusting, you know. But also like there's nothing else. You know, so it's like this complicated history I have, I feel like, with our representation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, to think about too, because I mean, I think for all of us, and something that's just kind of coming up here too, is like, because of how old we were, or how young we were really when it was all happening, like it didn't, the lack of representation or like the offensive, like you knew that. I mean, I didn't have the language to say like, oh, that's like Jerry Lawler being homophobic or whatever it might be, but like I feel like that, just like growing up and now being like a 31-year-old, like growing up, it was so just like a lot of it went over my head, thankfully. But I'd be so interested too in like hearing from like LGBTQ like wrestling fans who were like sitting in those stands as grown adults. Like it just like, it's horrible. And also it's like not an environment that, it wasn't an environment that made it like safe to be a queer wrestling fan, which is sad, you know? Yeah.
Or a queer wrestler.
Or a queer wrestler, right?
Period.
Oh my
like,
gosh.
They were coming out in the locker room as saying like they're queer or gay or whatever. And you better believe they weren't, because like they probably get their push, like, you know, taken away or whatever. Like you never know with these things.
Or you get straddled with like a gimmick, like the way that like you know, like I'm sure Chris Canyon was a guy probably worried that like if he came out, he would be given like a gay gimmick too, right? Like it, you know, so it's like, you know, and that's not who he was either. So
I mean,
he's gay, but not like, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, like his story is especially sad because I think that,
Yeah.
and I remember when he came out too, and he was like, "I'm the first openly gay pro wrestler," and of course there were like a lot of struggles and things that he went through, and I'm not, you know, I won't say because I can't remember off the top of my head if like if he attributed a lot of those to being like in the closet for so long and then his treatment by WWE. But I will say, I remember one segment where I don't even know if they like acknowledged him by name. And this is after he'd been an established star. I think it was like The Undertaker beating him up in the ring. And it was just like horrible. And it was actually like kind of an example of like gay bashing happening, but they were having a great time doing it. And it's sad to think of like what Canyon went through, and the struggles that he had. And I like, you know, things definitely, there's still some room to grow and places to go, but I think it's cool that like we have seen people like Darren Young comes to mind as an example, coming out since then. And you know, there are like a few of these other examples where it's like people who are a little bit before their time, before this era, and just acknowledging who they were. Like Darren Young, great example. Fred Rosser, like, acknowledges that nobody messed with him backstage, because I think it was some of those locker room leaders. I think I just saw an interview from him recently talking about this, that like spoke up and said like, we've got your back. Like, you're one of us. Like, we're not going to let people mess with you. But it's like crazy the difference a few years makes.
Chris Canyon had a really good Dark Side of the Ring on him. So definitely check that out. That was very eye-opening. Let's talk about today's industry and look at the present state of LGBTQ storylines, wrestlers, promotions. I would love to start with Billy on this because you know, we know you've put on your own wrestling shows. Paris is Bumping comes to mind for me. How do you feel about today's industry when it comes to queer representation?
Thumbs down, double thumbs down is what. Go for it.
Hey, what meh, you know. It's weird because in some ways it's the best it's ever been, but if you've been around, you can see how much farther there is to go. And it seems like, you know, like, will I see in my lifetime, you know, like the promised land, or like what it should be, right? Because like wrestling is a microcosm of the world, and the world right now is going back in time versus moving forward. I can't sit here and pretend like everything's perfect, because it's not. I will say that I do feel that a few of this generation of queer wrestlers, like, I think there was this moment of like, the ball is not going to be handed to me, so I'm going to create my own ball, and I'm going to run with it. You know, I can't bring the Muhammad to the mountain. I'll bring the mountain to Muhammad. And a lot of these pride shows were just born out of like frustration, you know, because it's like, it's hard to explain to a straight promoter like how I should be booked. What do I see for myself? Who my fans are and what they want to see. And, you know, I think, you know, I can never take super credit because I didn't create the first Pride shows. Controversy aside, like Rick Cataldo created the first Pride shows. And those were the first times that like you could see two queer people in a locker room, which is like this moment of like, are you real? Are you a real person? Like, I can speak in references that these stupid meatheads don't get. We can have a whole conversation in code. You know, I remember the first time I met another queer wrestler, Ashton Starr. I remember gluing his tracks in before he wrestled Sunny Kiss in before the show. And like, you know, those shows, they were once a year and then like twice a year, but like you would have such strength coming from those original shows that could carry you on for another year because you're not alone. And you now have like friends that you can call, you can text, that know what you're going through, which is like the beautiful thing of like, I think there's a new generation starting now that isn't my generation, I think, but our generation, like that in particular Matter of Pride kind of original thing was just like really cool because it was the first time you saw queer shows, and not queer shows where it was just like, here's two queer wrestlers and a bunch of straight people in Britain. Like those weren't the first queer shows. Like it is a queer roster with a queer booker, queer referees, blah, blah, blah. And it set forth in motion what you see today, you know, with like, for me, you know, being able to create Pro Wrestling Vibe and Paris is Bumping, Effie with Big Gay Brunch, like these kind of moments kind of help build upon one another, so that now you see that there are so many queer shows now, I can't name them all. Like they're just like so much. It's a surplus, but like it doesn't kind of, wrestling isn't kind of seeing us as like we generate dollars. They're going like, oh, these gay shows are nice, and people do come out and support them. They're not seeing that like, oh, like gay talent, queer talent are worth investing in and building companies around and really like giving our resource and our support to, which is frustrating. But like, you know, you put one foot in front of the other, hoping that, you know, the industry changes. And as far as the mainstream goes, I think it's a joke. I can't co-sign it. I can't co-sign hiring people that are like openly bigoted and contribute money to people who want to like literally kill trans people and having that person be on television every week, I don't fuck with that. I don't fuck with using my close personal friends as props in June and then they are never on TV again. I don't fuck with that. I don't fuck with the company that only will hire queer women, but they won't hire queer men. Or let's not even get started into if you're gender not performing. I mean, that's a whole other ballgame. So I can't sit here and be like wrestling's in a good place because it's just a lie. Progress has been made. We should take time to appreciate that. But like, we got so much further to go, you know, especially like being on the front lines and seeing like what happens behind the scenes. Like, people have no idea how much farther we have to go.
I love that you just laid that out so beautifully, Billy. And I think like one of the things that I just want to acknowledge too is that, like, building on what you're saying, is that, you know, these wrestling promotions aren't doing enough if they're just looking at like the gay dollar, for example, and they're not looking at like just our humanity more broadly. So I mean, I saw like the story from Effie from Hollywood Life, where just from today or from like the last few days, where he was just saying like, you know, pride can't be a celebration. I mean, the headline of it, if folks want to look it up, is like, pride can't be a celebration while trans people's rights are under attack. And it's like, yes, like we need to have this conversation about what it actually looks like to support the community, rather than like having like tokenized representation, or just like having people who aren't straight on your you know, on your rosters without even acknowledging it, or like fully celebrating it, or even like fully standing up for what they're doing. And then you point this out, like literally promotions that are run by people who are like funding the type of legislation that we want and need to fight against. Like, that's not cool. But it's cool also that like there's space for people to like speak up, and hopefully more and more people call that out and name names and all that stuff. You know, something that you said though that I want to acknowledge that ties back into like the past a little bit, you know, before I even get into my own like present representation that means something to me or that I appreciate, is like you mentioned Rick Cataldo, who is like, again, someone who's controversial in the wrestling world, but also like I literally grew up like as a teenager, like discovering my own like sexuality as I went to all of these indie shows in New Jersey that Rick Cataldo was on, and like just like the homophobia that was like thrown at him. And I get there was like definitely a character that he was playing into, and he was okay, like he not, I wouldn't even say was just okay with those reactions, but like begging for them. But it's like, how much does that damage, like how much does like seeing the way that like a gay character is like tokenized and attacked like affect like someone like me who was like a teen growing up in you know, literally in the crowds there. And so like, I mean, you're right, we have so much longer to go, but I also hope we'll never be in that place again where it's like, you know, where you have like slurs being thrown out at wrestlers and all sorts of stuff, you know, like that. But before I even get to my present representation, curious if anyone else wants to kind of jump in on the conversation.
I think Billy put it really well in terms of like, yeah, there's, you know, I think Out Sports has a list of like 16 pride shows, and I'm sure that's not all of them that are happening this month. So like, yeah, there's a ton that's happening. And I think it's just so hit and miss. Like I know here I'm in Toronto. There is a wrestler. I'm not going to name his name, but he tweeted some transphobic stuff. And there are companies who were like, yeah, we're not booking you anymore. And then there's some companies who still will continue to book this person. And, you know, in terms of like, you know, a lot of the independent wrestling that I go to, and even in, you know, major promotions, like there is just a level for me in terms of like, how safe do I feel like I can be coming, not only that I'm like giving you my money, but how safe will I be if I come and attend your show? Is it like a show that I can come and attend and be myself? I think to like the mainstream point, I think you're completely right, Billy. And especially the fact that like, it feels like, you know, at least with the two, you know, AEW and WWE, they have queer wrestlers, but it feels like it's never, they are so scared to acknowledge on TV that these are queer people, at least even often, and for that to be any part of their character or story or whatever, because I think that they're afraid that it will cost them money, that there'll be boycotts. Like, I mean, they'll go as much as to like have some people, but then that's it, like there's no, like Anthony Bowen in AEW, like, has it ever come up on TV that this is a gay man? Like, I only know, I think, because I know, so, it's just, yeah, it's pretty disappointing at like the most major level. And then I think really hit or miss at like the independent level.
Yeah, and I would even just like jump into, because I think like thinking of AEW as an example, like it's great. Like, I mean, I love that now versus where we were 10 years ago. Like, I could look and be like, oh, that's a roster that has like Nyla Rose and Sonny Kiss and Anthony Bowens and like Kiera Hogan and a number of other people. But it's like, how are you using them, with Sonny Kiss being like the one that has frustrated me so much, because I've been on this podcast in our 100 plus episodes, like here and there, saying like, especially early on, before I realized like, oh, they're not going to invest into this performer or like put this performer in a spot where like we'll actually see them on TV each and every week. Like, I just it's disappointing, and it's like good that we know that like our people are there, but that's just not enough. But I have to just shout out like one wrestler I love to see, who I want to see more prominently featured and celebrated, or I should say one queer wrestler who I want to see more prominently featured and celebrated. Like, Mari knows how much I love Mercedes Martinez. Like, that's my girl from, like, again, Jersey indie wrestling, and I'm such a fan. But I'm just like, give us her as a fully formed character. I mean, I don't even want to overlook the fact that like Grace, we have this week's Pride is Spoken podcast, and also we're talking about like intersectionality with Carla Cruz Godoy, who is on Survivor, who is also a wrestling fan and totally could be in this conversation, but like represents like being a Chicana, being like also a lesbian, like bringing all these identities into who she is. And I just like want that I need that in my pro wrestling at some point. So like, it's good that the people are there, but like we need to do more and do better in terms of that, But curious, like, Victoria, what you're thinking with all of this, and if there's anyone who's like kind of like a bright spot or like a silver lining through all of this stuff.
Absolutely. So I 110% agree with what everyone is saying. And I will say from like personal experience, like going to a WWE show, and like me, I'm trans. Like, so it's like I present like this pretty much every time I go out, you know what I mean? And so like just going there and being in that space definitely did not feel the safest, to say the least.
Yeah.
And like there were no really accommodations or not that I'm expecting, anything or whatever, but the thing is, like, you can tell there's a culture within the WWE fan base that is clearly not with the times, and WWE will of course cater to them, and of course not put their queer entertainment like to the forefront and in a positive light like they should be shown, you know what I mean? Like, Sonya Deville has been on the roster for how long? And you know what I mean? And then even with like queer storylines as well, like you don't see those, and especially not in a like positive way. So it's kind of like, yeah, you definitely do have a lot, like a long way to go in that sense. But I definitely am thankful for all of like the independent circuit scene like that I've been seeing, at least online, like you mentioned, like Ashton Starr, like such a phenomenal wrestler and a big Foxy fan too, like pulling out her scissors kick and her like backbreaker suplex, like all of that stuff. And so that's heavily appreciated, and like Mateo Valentine and Sonny Kiss, like just very talented queer people. And like I would love to see more trans representation just in general in the wrestling world, because fierce, yes, absolutely. Where can I see this match? Right here.
Ashton Starr, Sonny Kiss, head to head.
Kid Bandit and Edith Surreal are two trans wrestlers I think are like pretty awesome, pretty great. Dark Chic as well, I believe is trans. Yeah, there's some people out there. They're coming.
Yeah, I mean, like, kind of going back even like to kind of what you set up, Billy. Like, I'm curious, like, because you kind of touched on it a little bit, but in your opinion, because I'm sure that you spend a lot of time like just I don't know, encountering all of this, and you kind of set us up so nicely for this part of the conversation. Like, I mean, what is it? And this is maybe a huge question, probably for all of us, but like, what is it that like we want from the industry? Like, what does what do we need WWE, AEW, thinking of like those two in particular as like the biggest ones? Like, what change do we need from them? Or like maybe a better way to put it is like, what could they learn from you? Basically, what could they learn from the stuff that you're doing, from the stuff that like Effie and so many others are doing on the indies?
Well, to be completely honest, I need for them to hire more trans and like queer writers. Like that's just it, because we have the lens like necessary to write these storylines and write them well. But then also the go ahead to say, hey, we're putting our trust in you and putting you to the forefront. Like that's, like stop being money hungry essentially, and like make a stand for something, because you have queer entertainers who are, working just as hard as everybody else, like doing the same grind, like going travel to hotel, place to place, like, and what representation are they really given? What opportunities are they given? And like, it's important for these stands to be heard and to be taken, because otherwise they're not going to know any better. And they won't see it, and they'll continue to make like queer people the butt of the jokes. And so put them in the writer's seat and put them on the TV. That's it.
Damn, I love that list of demands, Victoria.
Yeah.
And just like, even like, just to comment on that before like bouncing around a little to Billy, to Grace too, is like, yeah, like queer people could also be draws and make money, but like if you're not giving that opportunity, then like you'll never know one way or the other like who will resonate. And like yeah, just like such a narrow way. It's just so narrow how they approach things. And you're right about the writers and everyone else. Billy, like, any thoughts on what needs to change too?
My viewpoint is very different.
That's all
I
good.
think we stop begging people who hate us to like us. I think that we would be a lot happier if we just made peace with the fact that like they don't see it for us. And I think making the conscious effort to invest that in which gives you what you desire will go a longer way. I mean, will there be a mainstream wrestling company that doesn't have deep ties to conservative money? Probably not. And I believe that we could have queer people in the writers' room. I agree with that. And in positions of power, I agree with that. Because historically we haven't had that, despite the fact that like Pat Patterson is the real brainchild behind the big expansion of the WWF in the 80s, and really is responsible for like that much money being made. So queer minds have been all over wrestling, but and because I'm super into being independent and I love the freedom and I love that, I really love working for and endorsing and like wrestling for like places like Enjoy Wrestling, where a trans woman is the champion. Edith Surreal is the champion. My company, one of the most rewarding parts of when we were running shows was seeing how deeply queer the audience is, and seeing that the money sustains itself on a smaller level. Bigger level, we're dealing with like sponsors and corporate America and just like but there are outlets that give you what you want, you know, I was the first booker to book an all trans main event, which includes the referee with like no one in the ring was cis at all.
Wow, yeah.
Black, you know, there are companies that are giving people what they are desiring. You know, distribution is not going to be the same as WWE. You know, they can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, you know, like ads in different places. I would love for like super rich queer person to like give one of us money so we can like, you know, have a strong alternative. Maybe we're not on TV, but like some sort of platform like Netflix or like, you know, a major streaming platform that the WWE can't cock block us on. You know what I mean? That would be, I think that that's what I would want people to want, you know? And I think another thing too is that there is a large segment of queer wrestling fans that really need to do the work on their internalized queer phobia and support queer shows. Because while there are so many queer wrestling fans that support these shows, go to these shows, know who we are, love what we do, there is a sizable amount of queer wrestling fans, and I see it on a very particular Facebook group that are deeply internally homophobic, queerphobic, transphobic, and like have no interest in anything other than a wrestler with a WWE diva aesthetic from 2006 to 2013. And while I literally love the divas down, there's so much more to that. And there's so much that is being crafted and created for your likes, for your interests. So I think that there's a problem, not a problem. I think that we can do more in-house as a community and more on what we expect outside. I think begging Vince to like validate queerness is just dumb to me. Tony has made it clear where he stands. Like, believe when somebody shows you who you are, believe them.
I text Vince every day, and I think one of these days he's going to get back to me. He'll change his mind, I think.
Persistence is key.
That's
Persistence
right.
is
That's right.
Sorry,
No,
my
that's-
internet trying to take me down. They're
It's
trying
all
to
good.
silence me.
It happens. And you know what? We're not going to let that happen here. And yeah, no, it's like, it's interesting kind of what you talked about, Billy, in terms of like, it's like building your own boat, so to speak, or building your own ship, whatever you want to call it, whatever mode of transportation it needs to be, or not. Like building your own platform is so powerful. And, you know, it is tough to be in a world where we are like, as wrestling fans, and I feel like this comes up in what Mari and I talk about a lot, where like we want certain things as wrestling, whether it's like in our identities as Black wrestling fans, that happens a lot, or like whatever it might be. And we love this thing so much that we just like want all of it to improve and be perfect. But you're right, like they're like Vince McMahon is not going to be the gay community's savior when it comes to representation. And yet at the same time, like I really want, well, one, I want like I love what you're talking about with like all of these independent groups and platforms being built out. You know what? I'm hoping if there are any billionaire gay people like
You want me to text Vince?
in,
Oh, never mind.
no, yeah.
That's okay. So
yeah, I'm just like, let me throw it in.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, but like, look, I'm just saying, like, let's get that money in and like have a good promotion, that really centers and like truly authentically represents. But also, I would love to see like just the people who are in those systems, AEW, WWE, like. I need you to call it. I like really want you to call out that type of thing. I want them to be able to be like, this is a problem. I'm, you know, not going to hold my breath for that. Cause money is money. But at the same time, like, you know, like let's do something to at least make sure that people realize what they're supporting and what they're part of, more than anything else. Like that's the thing for me that like, I feel like me and Mari talk about pro wrestling a lot and like about the problematic things and obviously about the things that we love all the time. But like people should just know what they're supporting, what they're putting their money behind, what they're doing when they are like buying a WWE shirt versus like buying a shirt for an independent wrestler and really like an independent creator through like their own platform or through one of these independent platforms. I will not name names of platforms, Pro Wrestling Tees and others, because like, you know, but I feel like having those like independent voices supported, that's some good shit.
Access to
Billy.
it too is so much easier than ever before. Like
Yeah.
you don't even have to be in a city where there's like a ton of independent wrestling to be able to find. You can find this stuff online, and it is a tough with that moment where you're like, yeah, maybe I don't want to give WWE my money anymore. It is like it's simple. Like we were fed the propaganda of WWE is the greatest wrestling company on earth, and wrestling we should all, you know, we all want to watch WrestleMania and all of this stuff. And it is like it's tough to be like, okay, I think I need to be, you know, done with that and choose to spend my money somewhere else and your time too. Like it you know, like you could just watch YouTube clips or whatever, but you're also giving them the time. Once you though, and it feels like you're going to lose something that you love, but there is so much independent wrestling out there to fall in love with. So like think about like if you do spend like, you know, 3 hours watching Raw, try spending like, you know, try to find some independent wrestling. There's lots of free stuff on YouTube too. You don't have to spend money. That's like, it's so good. And you'll find stuff you love as well. It does feel like you're giving up this big thing, but it can be worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
go
I
for
also
it.
think it's like it's that whole thing, like be the change you want to see in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like we're sick and tired of begging these big companies to give us crumbs of representation. So we're making our own, you know. Billy's out here making his own, and we're
Yeah.
seeing more and more. And you know, it might feel like a drop in the bucket right now, but if you keep going, then you know, eventually, hopefully, this generation, next generation, you know, we will be able to prove that queer representation draws dollars, that we can get a queer show like easily accessible to so many people. You know what I'm saying? So it it feels like it's not a lot, but it truly is. It's at least a huge step in the right direction.
It's interesting, just like it's so, I mean, yeah, just remembering where things were. Like I'm still surprised. I mean, I'm surprised that a lot of us are even like still wrestling fans with what the
Mm.
industry has kind of given in terms of those crumbs. But here we are, and you know, it's interesting. But yeah, like those little pockets of like, you know, it might not be the thing that everyone's watching or the mainstream product, but like having Billy, you doing what you're doing is amazing. And then beyond the wrestlers or wrestling promoters, I just love that there are more LGBTQ plus like wrestling content creators, whether it's podcasters and YouTubers and all that stuff. And so I just want to see, I don't know if there's anyone folks want to shout out. Billy, I don't know if you want to shout out yourself and like just like shout out the work that you're doing, of course, but like, yeah, would love to just acknowledge like wrestling content creators who are talking about the change that we need to do.
I would say that maybe in the Philadelphia area in spring of 2024, there may be a return of a certain highly experimental queer series that features ballroom elements that might be coming back to counter program the very boring work rate wrestling that will be happening during a certain week of manic wrestling. I would say that there's like a drag queen. God, I don't know their name. There's like a drag queen that does the video games, and I think that like does content about the video games, and like there's like a queer guy who like has a big following in creator wrestlers on the video games. I think that's like, and who like everyone likes. I think that's super cool. I mean, like, I could shout out everybody, but I'll like narrow it down. Like, shout out to Veda Scott. They're killing it. They do commentary. Like, first queer person to do commentary for New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor, and AEW. Like, no small feat. They are first queer person to do a deathmatch tournament this weekend. They're so incredible. Who else is queer that does? There's so many. Now I'm like on the spot, and I'm like, shout out to podcasts like yourselves and Grit and Glitter, LGBT in the Ring, the work that Brian Bell in particular, what they do for really pushing out content about queer talent and creating like equal things like the QWI 200, which I was the first person to ever be ranked #1, which is something I can like, little feather and cap moment. Shout out to the wrestling equivalent to singer-songwriters like myself and Effie and Dark Chic and Mateo Valentine, who just ran his first show, and the folks at Grap House in Vegas and Pride Style in Vegas, and the folks who run Full Queer in California, because it's super hard, and it's super awesome that there is more and more being pumped out. I'm forgetting somebody super important.
It's okay. We got you. You're done.
And shout out to shout out to every fan that is queer that goes to a show. It's cool seeing some ways like not subtle, in some ways subtle, a queer person in the audience in my entrance like acknowledge me and being like, what I used to do when I like years ago was in my gear I had an upside down pink triangle, and then I had a fan who like made a makeshift little pink triangle wristband, and she like flashed it up and then she put it down, and it's like, it's hard going to a wrestling show that isn't like queer focused, you know. But I think it's super great and it's super brave, and like you have no idea like the amount of fans who I knew as one thing, and now they are living their truth as trans and as queer, and they have said like it's because I saw trans people at a WWE house show. You know, it's pretty dope. So we're all in this together, you know. It's hard. Times are really hard, but like we are all doing our part, and I think that's super dope. And yeah, it's really cool. And I can't wait to do more together.
That's what it's about. Thank you, Billy. And yeah, like, look, we have a long way to go, as you mentioned, but it's like good that the progress is there, that the energy's there, that the community's there, like, and not like this doesn't need to just be a conversation for Pride Month, but this is like something that we should be talking about all the time in our wrestling content. And like, and thanks for like shouting out our platform, but also like other platforms doing this work, because like it does matter when we're speaking up about these things for the people who aren't thinking about, you know, pride, aren't thinking, I was gonna say pride, but really thinking about like LGBTQ plus people, about the legislation, about like who we are as people. And so it really does go a long way, and I feel like there's so many more people and platforms that we could shout out.
Yeah,
I see Mari.
Yeah, I know. I think Billy was talking about Nemesis LaCroix as the queer Twitch streamer who does a lot of WWE content.
Yeah.
They are amazing. Again, all of the content creators out there, like as content creators ourselves, we know how hard it is to put stuff together and not know if you're yelling into the void or not. And that's why we always encourage people to reach out to us. Like Billy said, let your entertainers, let your performers know that you're here for them and that you respect what they're doing and that you like what they're doing. And it just helps you. It just helps us know that we are reaching somebody. So definitely, you know, tip your queens, buy some merch, go to the shows, you know.
My singles here. I'm just pulling them out if anyone wants to say. I have a lot more. Yeah, there we go.
I'll take that from you. Sorry.
Yeah,
you know how much in Canada? That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, no, this has been amazing. And yeah, I mean, I think like one of the points as we kind of get close to our conclusion that Mari, you touched on, Billy, like just to underscore it is like something that we see in a lot of these different communities that now like, you know, like our support of the wrestlers matters, their support of us matters, and it becomes this cycle where like who knows, like one day maybe we will have like a mainstream queer pro wrestling promotion taking over. But even if we don't have that, like like the cool thing is like so much is happening in these little pockets that's like cool to celebrate. And so I mean, I just wanted to see, maybe beginning with you, Victoria, like not to put you on the spot, but like if there are any words that you just have for like anyone who's listening, regardless of their like sexual orientation. So our straight listeners, our like queer listeners, like any words that you just want for them in terms of like what you hope that they could do to support like this really like this growing movement of LGBTQ plus people within pro wrestling, or let's hope what's growing movement.
Absolutely, yes. So first off, just thanks for everybody for like listening, because that's the important step. Like listening to like our struggles and what we go through and our stories through our point of view is very important, you know, and that's how we would be able to, you know, create that empathy and understanding, because like we're all the same, you know what I mean? And we deserve to be treated the same. So when it comes to like wrestling, among like all other, you know, forms of entertainment and beyond entertainment, just in like work lives and it's everyday lives, you know, you see like queer rights, trans rights being taken away. And like, of course, that's not okay. And you need to, you know, be able to put yourself in our shoes and just create that understanding there. But like in terms of like your hetero listeners like here, like just hearing us out and like hearing just what we go through, and not only us as viewers, but the entertainers who put their lives on the line for, you know, our enjoyment, you know, being paid dust and not being accurately represented in media, you know. And I would love to see, you know, some queer wrestling promotions like be as accessible as, you know, the mainstream like WWE, AEW, because a lot of people, they don't know what's out there, you know. And so I feel like accessibility is very important in that aspect. So yeah, big ups to any like queer like show promoters who are actively pushing their queer talent and making them visible, because we are here, we're not going nowhere. So
Very true. Grace?
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing. Is like, you know, appreciate all the queer people who go out and perform. But I think also if you're like, you know, anybody listening to this, just try to expand your, you know, your Twitter feeds if you're still using Twitter, or who you're watching on Twitch, or who you're subscribed to on YouTube, and yeah, try to expand it as much as possible to include queer wrestlers and queer promotions, and yeah, try to expand your field, and yeah, dabble, yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah.
Billy, any other words? You've really like hit home, like bam bam, so many of the points. But any other words for the people that you want to put out there, just as we get close to wrapping up, before we get to plugs, of course.
Two things. Number one, I would say if you're a queer wrestling fan and you really feel unsafe and unwelcome going to mainstream shows or like higher profile independent shows, there are vibes and brunches and hood slams that are waiting for you with open arms. And I can attest to the fact that I have had people come to these shows and make it home in complete safety and felt like they could be their true authentic selves. And it's a marvel every time, because I know that it's really hard. So know that you may not get it from certain places, but there are so many places waiting for you that are ready to love on you and ready for you to meet all new friends. And number two, don't ever stop using your voice. even when it's to check a queer talent, queer promotion, I've had my community tell me that the content that we did at a certain point, they were like, not feeling it, wrong direction, please don't. And you got to take the feedback. And because we don't have all the answers. And also, sometimes you can be too inside the business, to see clearly at times. So your critique and your criticism, you know, if done with respect, like does mean a lot to us because we want to make sure we're representing a group of people that we do it the best way we know how. So just know that there is a place for you in this wild world and that your voice, when I tell you your voice does matter, like it absolutely has. You have no idea how you've been able to move mountains behind the scenes by just being vocal in your support or your disapproval. So thank you and never, ever stop being loud and proud.
Damn, I'm tearing up now. Mari, what are we supposed to do? Do we have to end it? Do we have
I was about
to?
to say, I think we got to end on that note. That is a very powerful note. So just real quickly, tell the people where they can find you. Anything you want to plug, please let them know. I'll start with Victoria. What you got going on over there in Orlando?
Yes, Orlando. So I have a weekly show that I perform at Mannequins Lounge, which is in Sanford, Florida, every Thursday as a part of Treehouse, which is the title of our drag show. It's like a treehouse, like family, So if you're ever in the area and wanting some good vibes and fierce entertainment, because we're like the best there is, to be completely honest, then that's where you'll catch us. Also, me personally, I'm pretty easy to reach. X Victoria Cage X on Twitter and on Instagram. So yeah, that's where you can catch me and some of my work. And of course, I love talking drag. I love talking wrestling. So feel free to reach out to me for anything. More specifically, like if you want to catch me like at like any recent shows, like tomorrow I'm doing a show at Mannequins, and Saturday I'm doing a show in DeLand for my birthday celebration because my birthday is Monday. Yes. So yeah, just hit me up, message, and yeah, it's a safe space.
Billy, how about you? Where can the people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at the Billy Dixon, and you can follow Pro Wrestling Vibe at PW Vibe on Twitter and Instagram. And also, I'd be remiss to tell you that at a wrestling show, I will give you 50% off of merch if you show me proof of voter registration, or if you let me help you register to vote at vote.org. So come hang out and make sure you're registered to vote because we need your vote.
Yes, that's amazing.
Seriously.
Grace, what do you have going on?
Yeah, I'm mostly talking TV over on post show recaps, still talking Succession. We're ranking the episodes, and we're doing a battle royale. I feel like you would like that. We're doing a battle royale, ranking pitting the Succession characters against each other. Ariel and I are also watching The Idol, so that people don't have to. We'll tell you how it is. It's bad. That's how it is. And covering movies and yeah, lots more. I'm on Twitter at Hi From Grace.
Matt.
Yeah, damn. Well,
what have you got going on?
You could find me
It
here.
is bad. It's so bad.
I'm not watching The Idol, but here on the Wrestling RHAPup, of course, as always, with Mari. And otherwise, I think I just want to shout out a couple of other things. One being the Pride Has Spoken podcast about Survivor and the things with Grace, of course, but also with Dr. Evie Jagoda, talking Survivor, talking queer representation, and this week talking with Carla Cruz Godoy from Survivor 43. So really interesting conversation that we had diving in, and a lot of people who enjoy this podcast will probably enjoy that because 2 of the 5 people who made up this panel are also part of that. So check that out at robhasawebsite.com/pride feed to subscribe to the podcast. And also just want to shout out, I'm in. I, I don't know how to put this, but like Survivor, amazing show. Queer stuff, amazing. If you are a queer person who's interested in like maybe playing a game of Survivor, I'd encourage you to check out Survivor Philadelphia, which I was part of. It's on social media at Survivor Philly, a great fan-made game. I was the only queer representation my season of it, but I'm really hoping to change that and bring in some more people and some more, melanated representation as well. So again, check that out at Survivor Philly. They have an interest form on their social media, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say that it's happening or not, but sign up for the interest form. There'll be a casting thing that comes out when it does, and super well produced, and I'm excited to be part of helping capture people's really good stories through that. So, Mari, where can the people find you? Last but not least, definitely.
Yes, so every week here, Wrestling RHAPUp podcast. Again, if you haven't subscribed already, go to robhasawebsite.com/wrestling/wrestling feed. But also every time, every Tuesday, me and Sarah Carradine bring True Crime Tuesdays to RHAP with the Crime Scene podcast. It is a true crime review podcast where we talk about we rate and review true crime docuseries. So this week we just covered The Secrets of Hillsong. We talked about it with Mark Blankenship. Again, talk about like not having queer representation in a church. But if you want to hear us, I know if you want to hear us talk about that docuseries, there's a docuseries on Hulu. You can go and check that out by going to robhasawebsite.com/crime feed. And of course, follow me on Twitter and on Twitch at Mari Talks Too Much. That's 2 like the number 2. Follow me and subscribe on both those platforms. And that about wraps it up. Thank you to our amazing panel of guests. Hopefully we can have you guys on individually this season to talk wrestling. But we do really appreciate having you on here. Of course, you can reach the Wrestling RHAPUp on Twitter at Wrestling RHAPUp, at Wrestling RHAPUP on Twitter, and you can use hashtag Wrestling RHAPUp to join the conversation. Thank you. Remember, wrestling is for everybody, but not all wrestling is for everyone. Bye.
Up, lay it down just like Matt and Mari. Wrestling liver HAPUp's gonna make it sorry. Feeling like The Rock cause I'm driving in Ferraris. And we coming every week and it's feeling like a party. Moolah Ric Flair, showing out like Bianca Belair, Best podcast, flush it in the air, Roman Reigns and we win it, don't care, No cap. Throw 'em up, lay it down just like Matt and Mari. Wrestling liver HAPUp's gonna make it sorry. Feeling like The Rock cause I'm driving in Ferraris. And we coming every week and it's feeling like a party.